Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. Hi, I'm Adam Huss, and my guest for this episode is Alice Anderson. Alice is the vigneron for Amevive Winery, based in Santa Barbara County. Alice leases the Ibarra-Young Vineyard in the Los Olivos district and farms it with regenerative, organic, and biodynamic viticulture in partnership with the animals and native flora and fauna. In this interview, we really dig into the wine growing and winemaking specifics of how to craft beautiful natural wines, even in hot, crazy years like 2020. It's clear that Alice's brilliance is in her holistic perspective on both caring for vines and making wine. And her generosity of spirit and thoughtfulness come through in the way that she approaches every aspect of her passion. Amevive is only in its second vintage, and it's clear we can expect great things to come from Alice. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you value this podcast and would like to support it, it's as easy and delicious as buying a bottle of Centralis wine. Centralis Wine is my winery, and I started it to promote regenerative organic agriculture like what we talk about on this podcast episode, because I believe it's one of the most powerful solutions to some of the most important problems we're facing in human and environmental health today. Centralis wines are only ever made from organically grown grapes, so you can be part of making a cleaner, healthier world simply by choosing to buy our wines. And since Centralis is the sponsor of this podcast, buying a bottle helps to promote people like Alice, who are also doing amazing work and making our planet cleaner and more delicious through regenerative organic agriculture. You can buy Centralis wines at centraliswine.com. That's CENTRALAS wine.com. And you can buy Alice's wine at amevivewine.com. That's AMEVIVE wine.com. Enjoy. Hi, Alice. Thanks so much for being here and doing this.
Hey, it's a pleasure.
So you are a California girl, born and bred, right?
Born and bred, Central Valley.
Central Valley. What part of the Central Valley?
I grew up in Modesto, and then
Right on.
most of my upbringing was there. For a couple short years, I lived in Napa with my family, but most of my upbringing's in Modesto.
And did you? I mean, that is definitely grape country. Did you feel that in your blood from an early age, or?
You know, my mom has always been in the wine industry, kind of. She's a graphic designer. So when we lived in Modesto, she worked for Gallo for their creative department. And then when we lived in Napa, she worked for Mondavi before they sold. So that was kind of my in the wine industry. But, you know, I didn't really know that until I got older. But yeah, growing up in Modesto, you're surrounded by agriculture. And I think that's where my love for farming and animals and that sort of lifestyle evolved from.
Great. So you fell in love with animals, or maybe not fell in love with animals and agriculture, but it was, or did you? Was it love? Was it a love?
Yeah, I don't know. I've always loved animals. Like I grew up riding horses and being at the barn. Oh my gosh, 6 days a week riding everyone's horses and, you know, going on trail rides out in the orchards and walking along the canal banks. And I think that was like, yeah, I would say I did fall in love with animals first and agriculture alongside it.
I don't was in any way or organic viticulture or those kind of values part of the agriculture that you were growing up with via your parents or any other exposure?
No, I can't say so. I think that,
I mean, I wouldn't guess so in the Central Valley. It would be a
yeah,
rare thing.
I think it's pretty normal to be exposed to, you know, kind of conventional agricultural practices. And then with your evolution in agriculture, you kind of figure out what's important to you. And, you know, what's important to me is our planet, what I put in my body, what we expose ourselves to. And that just completely lends itself to organic farming and, you know, furthermore, regenerative farming and biodynamic farming.
Well, and we'll get to exactly what you're doing, and but just teasing it, it's, you are doing all the work in the vineyard that you're working in. So I imagine that plays a part in terms of being very conscientious about what the environment is that you're working in and what you're spraying into it. Which is, I mean, I know a selfish motivation, but I think that's important as well. Um, but so let's get back to, how did you make that transition when you were heading out into the world to forge your fate? What directed you, and where did you go?
Yeah, so right out of high school, I went to Cal Poly and have a degree there from in viticulture and enology. So they kind of teach you, the basics of viticulture, of kind of the conventional style, and try to set you up to be the most successful that they can in this world. And it was awesome. And then after that, so after Cal Poly, I went to New Zealand and I worked. I was there for 7 months and worked at Amefield, and then in the vineyards at Ripon Vineyard down in Wanaka, and they're very famously a biodynamic operation, and so that is kind of where I truly fell in love with, taking care of your own land and being a good land steward and using everything that you have on your property. And it was where I first saw the owners working every day in the vineyard to produce the grapes for their wine. It was just incredibly humbling and such an amazing experience. And then after my time in New Zealand, I moved to France for a couple years, and yeah, I was mostly in the wineries there. I worked at a winery in the Northern Rhone. But the French culture, the French viticulture culture, is so ingrained that you make what you grow, and that's just the only way of making wine. So that was kind of, yeah, that was amazing.
What part of the Northern Rhone?
I lived in a little tiny town called Malaval. It's a medieval town
Mm.
up in the hillsides of Saint Joseph, just, yeah, in the hillsides north of Chavannes, or not north, I guess, west of Chavannes. Yeah, amazing. So yeah,
What were
an
they
hour
growing?
south of Lyon.
I mean, it sounds like Syrah country, but is that the main thing? Were they growing other things there?
Yeah, so Syrah, Viognier, Roussanne, and Marsanne. Mostly Syrah, though.
What did you learn about? I mean, about winemaking from the French, especially there. I mean, aside from this idea that you just mentioned, which I love, the idea of, you're growing your wine, you're personally growing your wine. What
Yeah,
else in the cellar did you learn about, or did you spend as much time in the cellar as the vineyard, or?
yeah. So I definitely spent more time in the cellar when I was in France. And just a day every couple weeks or so in the vineyard, so just to expose me a little bit to it. And it was amazing, working with mostly guys doing the hard labor, because they're hard working people in France on those hillsides in the Northern Rhone. Anyway, back to winemaking.
No,
uh,
no, that's I would love to hear that. What was that like? Were you the only girl out there?
Oh my gosh. Well, there's a lot of, there's definitely women that work in the fields, but they're doing mostly like shoot thinning or harvesting, and kind of like the easier air quotes tasks. And the guys would be like working the toy, which is like the big plow that you attach to your tractor and kind of tilling up the soil all by hand. Those the guys are the people with the backpack sprayers walking up the steep rocky hillsides, and it was just funny. So yeah, I mean, when I put the backpack on to carry the grapes during harvest that everyone's throwing the buckets in, it was just a comical experience, and everyone's like, "Yeah, Alice." So, and then they put
Did
me on the toy, and yeah, good
Were
times.
there other Americans working with you?
No, well, not during off vintage. So my first vintage up in the Northern Rhone, there was one other American guy, and he left after harvest, and I stayed on. They hired me full time at that point, and and then yeah, through the year, no, it was kind of when I got hired back on. They told me that the only way that they're going to hire me back on is if they don't speak English to me. So, so that was a quick little realization that yeah, I better get good at French or at least try to understand it.
How did you do
So,
that?
oh man, well, it's just context clues for the first week or so, and then it just happens.
Yeah.
And I remember being extremely tired the first month of all French in the cellar, and then it just becomes easier. And I'm so grateful for that because now I can, understand conversations and engage. I wouldn't say I'm 100% fluent by any means, but I can definitely get myself around very well. So I'm so grateful for that.
Nice. You weren't doing any like Duolingo on the side
Yeah, I
or was
did do that. I woke up every morning for the first month probably and did my Duolingo and
uh
felt good about that. Went to the cellar, did my work. I'm still like type, and then I had to like type some emails in French for people, and like that stuff is still super hard for me, but because I never learned in a professional, sit down like classroom setting of how to speak French. It was all verbal. Um,
Right.
so I still don't write very well or anything like that, but that's okay.
Gotcha. So were they practicing biodynamic or organic viticulture where you were working?
No, no.
Okay.
Actually, in the Northern Rhone, there's only a few wineries that or practice organic and biodynamic viticulture.
So what
Probably,
was that contrast like between New Zealand and France? I mean, did that inform your thoughts and values around wanting to do one version or the other when you had a chance to
um,
do it yourself?
yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. I haven't like thought about it too finitely like that, but it just was
So
has been more of
you
a
weren't doing like comparing and contrasting in your head,
no.
going from one to the other. Okay.
Well, actually, like kind of my first, the whole a big part of my transition into farming has been because I wanted to farm with horses.
Hmm.
So, I when I lived in France, I went and mentored with people that were horse plowing and using horses in the vineyard as a way of avoiding the tractor and getting back
Right.
to the original roots of farming. Um,
Yeah.
and just working with an animal is so incredibly powerful, and it brings a whole new set of energies to the vineyard, which is a living being and produces a living thing that we turn into wine. So that was kind of my first step, and that's what I learned in France. And then coming back to the States, that was my first intention farming the vineyard was I really wanted to horse plow and work with horses, and that has kind of like naturally morphed into regenerative farming. And I would love to still work with horses in the vineyard in a little bit more of a different way at this point, but
Have
yeah,
you Yeah, I was going to
you can't
ask,
have
are you
everything good
still
at once.
say that again, sorry?
You can't have everything good at once, so it's just baby steps.
Now, do you still want to plow your vineyard or are you no-till?
Yeah, I'm fully no-till. So we are on our the vineyard's on its second year fully no-till.
Okay.
And yeah, at this point, I don't want to till. There's a couple sections maybe that have a lot of Bermuda grass that I would potentially take out with, you know, manually.
Yeah.
But right now, I don't want to. And that could change, but for the most part, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of regions that I don't want to till, and we can get into that as much
Yeah,
or
well,
as
no,
needs.
I know that temptation because we, our yard, which we treat as a vineyard orchard garden, was all Bermuda grass before it became that, and
Oh,
you just can't get rid of that stuff. I mean, it
oh
is forever there, um, and it
yeah,
spreads if you turn your back on it for a quarter. It's like, oh wait, now we have a yard again. Like,
yeah,
um,
it is
well, yeah,
rough.
yeah, insidious. So, well, let's introduce what you're doing now. So you came back from France, and it sounds like you have a lot going on in addition to just the vineyard. But why don't you? I mean, give us an overview, and then talk about this vineyard and what it is, where it is, what it's called, the history of it, and that kind of things. But also what are you doing in general right now?
Sure, yeah. So when I came back from France, I came back for an assistant winemaker job at Tyler Winery in Lompoc, and I've kind of been mostly a winemaker, like professionally. That's where I've you know made a living, I guess.
Hmm.
And then, I just kind of like naturally was like, well, let's move on. And so, yeah, I make wine for another client, and I'm the assistant at another place for Tatomer right now. And he's amazing. And then on the side, I have my own wine label called Amevive. And I farm a vineyard called Ibarra-Young. It's in Los Olivos district in Santa Barbara County. And it was planted in 1971 by Charlotte Young. The Youngs bought the property in the early 1950s, I think 1952. And Charlotte Young has had three daughters, two of which still live on the property and are organic farmers also. So the land has had the same owners since the 50s, which is, I mean, I love. One of the granddaughters
Yeah.
also lives on the property too, and she's an organic farmer, and she's helping me a lot actually with kind of the evolution of reintroducing natives back on the property. But anyway, we'll get back to that. Kind of the story of the vineyard. Yeah, it was planted
So
in 1971, and then Bob Lindquist came over in, I believe, 1986 or the mid to late 80s, and took over the vineyard and started farming it. And he transitioned to all organics in the mid 1990s. So it's been organic for a long time, since organic was even trendy, I guess. Um, and yeah, so he planted a couple more blocks. He planted some Albarino, which has since been grafted to Marsan. And he planted some really cool Tempranillo suitcase clone cuttings and some Graciano. So everything is own rooted on the property. Um, yeah, and then so Bob Lindquist gave up the lease in 2018, and at that point, kind of word was going around that this amazing parcel was up for lease, and a few people sent it to me on separate occasions, and I kind of was like, wow, I didn't know I was putting this into the universe, but I guess I should go look at this place and meet with these people. And at the beginning of 2019, I met with them, and I fell in love with the property, but I just wasn't quite ready, financially or probably emotionally, to kind of take on the burden of leasing and farming this 8-acre vineyard. So, um, yeah, I passed in early 2019, but I ended up buying Marsan from the property.
hmm.
And in 2019, kind of had a year of rest. the growing season of 2019. So there was no sprays, no tilling of the soil. All it was pruned and harvested.
Hmm.
Um, and then, the end of 2019 came around and the vineyard needed a leaseholder still. And I was just like super ready and stoked, and yeah, pulled it all together. And we've been farming this vineyard since the beginning of 2020. So it's been a good
Well,
quarantine project.
what was that process like of getting prepared mentally or financially or otherwise to lease an 8-acre vineyard? I would love to dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I feel like I've always been really able to do it and I've had like the vision of doing it. But for me, the big barrier has been financially and like, yeah, just trying to get all of the parts together because it's not just the lease we pay, it's all of the inputs that we need to do, all of the labor that we need to, pay to make this happen. And my lovely partner in life and partner in business has been an amazing help in this, Topher. So we pulled it all together, and yeah, I mean, it's been great. But as far as what it takes, I mean, yeah, talking with friends and talking with people that have done this before, and talking to vineyard managers in the area, as well as getting your vision's right and figuring out what that looks like to you. I mean, I don't farm, by any conventional means at all. I'm definitely trying to like push the push the boundary as far as what is normal here on Santa Barbara County and see
Nice.
what we
You're
can
trying
do.
to spread the spectrum so that so normal skews a little bit more in that direction, I guess.
Yeah.
So, um, you have told me that you allocate about 20 hours a week to
Yeah.
vineyard work. Does that sound right?
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds about right.
Now, some people might listen to this and think, how could you spend 20 hours a week in an 8-acre vineyard? I mean, what do you do? Like once you prune it, it grows and then you harvest it at the end of the year. What's the big deal? Like
Oh my gosh. There is so much to do all the time. So yeah, so not only do we have those big tasks like pruning, shoot thinning, spraying, which is not that many times for us, but yeah, there's also weed whacking and consciously planting, and there's irrigation repairs and gopher trapping and creating habitats for our animals and chipping. I mean, the, the list goes on. Nets are huge, like protecting
yeah.
our assets from birds, because we are in we are in a pretty urban setting. There's other things that we can do like cannons or lasers, but right now we're using nets. um, yeah, that takes a lot of time to put those nets on, protect our grapes, take those nets off, put them away for the season. Now we're really focused on, so now that our nets are done, we're kind of weed whacking under rows and getting it ready for the rainy season, and our cover cropping and our compost, and then that will grow. And then we're going to be reintroducing our sheep for the winter and springtime. So it'll be rotating our sheep and our chickens and ducks. So there's always something.
Sort
Yeah,
of like you're a herder and a uh, landscaper and a viticultural manager, all of the above,
exactly. Yeah, and it's
and
trying to
maintenance person.
yeah, and it's trying to find a connection with the land too. And you can farm. I mean, the classic way to make money farming a vineyard is to do it all the same, right? Like you take your recipe and you do it in one place, it works there. Okay, apply it to the next place. And yes, sure, you can farm like that, but and you will get grapes, but you won't. I don't necessarily think that you get grapes with soul and with energy and with intent. And by literally walking our rows every day and noticing what each vine is doing, and noticing the plants that are growing around each vine, and the animals that are moving around our vineyard and helping with the entire ecosystem, like that matters, and we want to encourage that, and that takes a little bit more time.
I notice you have one of your labels has an owl on it, and is that because do you encourage predatory birds to
Yeah,
nest around the vineyard?
absolutely. Yes. So all of the wine labels are all based on the natural flora and fauna of the vineyard. So there's
Right,
an owl on one, there's a jackrabbit on one, surrounded in coyote bush. On the back there's some quail, and there's a California king snake, and the other one there's a blue dragonfly and some California native flowers. But yeah, so that we're trying to work with nature rather than against it. So like when you think of, yeah, keeping a predatory bird there, we're no till, so we're not like disturbing our soil in any way. So oftentimes, people think of gopher problems, but if you have gophers, you're not tilling up that soil. You may have gophers, but you also have a higher snake population. You also aren't disturbing the home for the weasels that are just absolutely ferocious predators to gophers, and other species. And then if you have those snakes, then you have bigger populations like red-tailed hawks and barn owls and great horned owls, and just creating the system that works all by itself is important.
right. Since you brought that up, how you say that you are farming it regeneratively, organically. What does that mean? What does regenerative mean
Yeah,
to you?
sure. So there's, ultimately regenerative agriculture is all about rebuilding and maintaining soil health and increasing the health of your topsoil. So by doing that, we're cover cropping, we're applying compost and creating compost from the waste on our land. We're not tilling the soil. We're using sheep and chickens and ducks to graze responsibly. Um, we're introducing kind of perennial crops that will stay in the ground forever and always have a living root system. And so that's kind of like the basis of regenerative farming. But furthermore, we're really conscious about our actual footprint on the land and kind of what that means, and we're actively trying to reduce it. So, we're trying to also increase biodiversity and kind of create as many plants as we can, and give them a home, plants and animals, and they work off each other. So
When you say create as many plants as you can, what do you mean by that?
I guess not necessarily create, because plants kind of grow themselves, but giving them an opportunity to thrive, introducing them, letting them consciously seed. And, so there's, we have some pretty cool plants on our land. We have this native lupin to our land that has been there since, before, for a long time. I mean, there's photos of one of the granddaughters standing in the lupin field when she was 6, and now that lupin field is where our Graciano is. So taking that plant that's indigenous to our land and spreading that seed all over and kind of actively incorporating that. And lupin is really powerful. It's a nitrogen fixer. Um, and another cool thing about it is the sheep don't touch it. So, it's toxic to sheep and cattle. So oftentimes they won't eat it unless they're absolutely starving. And it's beautiful. So it does a lot of positive things. Another cool native that we have on the land is this Spanish lotus, which is also nitrogen fixing and stays close to the ground. So actively trying to, take where the Spanish lotus is growing and moving it to other parts of the vineyard that, need more nitrogen. Well, the whole vineyard needs more nitrogen, but spreading that around and using what's on the land to our advantage.
You I mean, they all flower too. I imagine there's a uh, entomological benefit to a lot of these as well.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's another that's another reason why it's so important to have a bunch of different plants on your land. They all attract different species of butterflies, birds, dragonflies, and it's creating a system that works by itself. And yeah, so we're not only using like what we have on our land to our advantage, but we're also kind of introducing other natives in our cover cropping program to enhance the biodiversity on the site.
That's nice. You also let the animals run through and munch on those, and they're fertilizing things with their munching and pooping. So,
So
is
yeah,
there any? Are there any other benefits to animals in the
yeah.
vineyard?
Well, besides kind of the obvious natural fertilization and free lawn mowing, with that
Right.
with that lawn mowing, when an animal chops on that plant, there's kind of a root flush of all of these different species, and those root flushes are creating a home for all of these microbes to, yeah, create more nutrient available to our plant. So that, and there's like kind of going back to my love for animals, like there's an amazing connection that animals have with people, or people have with animals, and I think that can't be forgotten. And when we work with animals in our vineyard and in our everyday, it brings us joy. It makes the place feel more alive and gives it some soul and some energy. And yeah, that all translates, I think, into the wine that we make from the site.
Yeah, I think I agree very much. I mean, even just having our little cat that we found in the backyard, who's now a big cat, as a roommate, it's sort of makes our little yard feel alive as he prowls around, um,
Absolutely.
terrorizing our ankles. um, you are actively cultivating the soil microbiology, and I know you're conscientious of that. Is that something that you learned in school, or where did you pick up your knowledge about soil microbiology and the plants that benefit that and the practices that benefit that?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on it a little bit in school, but definitely not as much as I'm into it now. And it's just reading and listening to people, and watching things and watching it work. Um, I and talking with the granddaughter on the property. She is amazing and helps me with native plants, and she has a whole entire business based on going out to the hillsides and collecting seed of native plants and propagating those seeds and selling the plants to the public to reintroduce natives back into their yards. So she lives on the property, and she is an amazing source for all of my plant happy soil needs. So she's lovely.
Nice. Well, and you said you were doing some leaf petiole testing for nutrients and saw there were some deficiencies. How are you dealing with that? I mean, if I've gotten that correct.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, the last 5-ish years, from what I understand, the vineyard hasn't had any compost inputs, or like much input at all.
Hmm.
So we actually have kind of the easiest deficiency to counter. Our main deficiency is nitrogen, which
Uh-huh.
we're very lucky, I guess. Nitrogen, animals poop and we are successful. So, yeah, just bringing in more animals and applying compost and chicken poop and duck poop and that sort of thing. So,
Could you, without the animals, get enough nitrogen just from cover crops or anything like that, from just pulling it out of the air?
Yeah, totally. Like there's amazing, I forget. Yeah, I didn't mention that, but cover cropping and using nitrogen fixing plants like beans, vetch. I mean, even our lupin or our Spanish lotus. All of those things are trapping nitrogen into our soil. So consciously cover cropping. Yeah, we are doing all of that also.
When you're doing this kind of fertilization of the soil, regeneration of the soil, what is the time frame for seeing a change? So you did a sample and took
Yeah.
tests and you see that there's a nitrogen deficiency. Can you see an improvement by the spring when new leaves come out?
I mean, it's possible, but no, I think there's going to be more of like a 5 to 8 year timeline when it comes to the land completely relying, like regenerating itself, really, like the topsoil having enough nutrients and microbes and fungi and plant roots to make a difference in analysis. But so right now we're building that. It doesn't happen
Right.
overnight. It's a transition, and we're in it for the long haul, really.
Right. And well, that brings up a couple questions, but going back, you might have said this, but how was the vineyard farmed since the 70s? Has it always been farmed organically or?
No, yeah. So from the beginning, they tilled a lot. They used Roundup. They used Roundup for about 20 years until the mid 1990s when they stopped all of that. Um, and yeah, they said goodbye to Roundup and started using mostly sulfur in the vineyard,
Uh-huh.
which is organic.
Yep.
And but it's always been tilled. So
Okay.
until 2019. So
Gotcha.
yeah, there's been uh, some good things and some average things throughout the life of the vineyard. But we're trying, like with all of the tilling and loss of nitrogen and loss of nutrients and microbes and fungi in our soil. We've got a lot of work to do in rebuilding that and creating a topsoil that will hold water and has a place for microbes and fungi and is porous and yeah, has a holds a lot of nutrition for our vine.
Right. Nice. So you are also now selling or have sold your 2019 vintage, is that right?
Yeah, so we released our first wines in, must have been beginning of October.
And you,
um,
you buy some grapes, right?
yeah, so we buy our Gamay, and then last year we bought our Syrah also.
Okay.
And then this 2020, we're only going to make Syrah from the vineyard. Um,
Uh-huh.
but we bought Gamay, so that will still
Are
exist.
you and what other wines are you making?
So in 2019, I released Marsan from Ibarra-Young Vineyard and Syrah and Gamay. And then in 2020, I'll have a rosé from Graciano from the vineyard. I'm doing a co-ferment, which is delicious. As kind of like a cold red wine.
What's
And
what's the what's the co-ferment?
the co-ferment is Marsan, Syrah, and Mourvèdre. And the
Mm.
intention, it's made very different than most of my wines. Most of my wines are very whole cluster central. And this
Uh-huh.
wine is 100% destemmed, like very low extraction.
Mm.
And the reason behind this wine is firstly to try to like diversify the vineyard from being a heavy red vineyard to something a little bit fresher and lighter. And, I like to drink like fresh, light, easy wines.
Uh-huh.
So I wanted that to reflect it. And then this one part of the vineyard, it borders this beautiful garden that gets a lot of water and I'm sure fertilizer. And so this one row, just the vines are huge. The canes are all touching the floor and the clusters are massive. And we got 1 ton to the row instead of like 1.3 tons to the acre, like the rest of our vineyard. So it didn't really make sense to put those grapes in with our single varieties. So I wanted to do something different. So I destemmed it, and it's its own wine now. Those three grapes together.
That's
Yeah,
nice. And I'm sure you've been tasting it. How is it?
it's so good. Um, it's just delicious. I mean, it's easy and drinkable, and yeah, hopefully that'll be a nice springtime wine, and that'll be released with the rosé as a little special treat.
So, I mean, it's funny. I've heard that when you add white, I've read studies about adding white to red actually increases extraction and color intensity and things like that. How did you experience that, or I don't know what proportion you added it in? Maybe you added enough that it actually diluted it. But yeah, what is your what were your proportions? I guess what went into that?
Yeah, so I think I didn't measure anything. They were all picked on the same day, and it just,
Gotcha. Yeah,
yeah, but
like a true field blend.
true field bend, yeah. So we just
Nice,
worked up the row, and put them all in the same couple bins. So I would
nice.
estimate about, excuse me, 35% Marsan,
Okay,
35% Syrah, and the rest Mourvèdre.
okay,
And because they were all harvested the same day, Mourvèdre ripens a lot later than Syrah and Marsan. So that was, much leaner and didn't quite have the color development that, the Syrah had.
right.
So it's,
True.
um,
Yeah,
it's a vibrant red, but it's still very transparent. It's not deep
nice.
by any means. And I didn't do any heavy punch downs, or, it's all just with my hand and very lightly
Right.
extracted. So intentionally, with that in mind. So
What what? How would you do a heavy punch down? I'm just curious.
oh yeah, like double, once in the morning, once in the evening,
Oh, gotcha,
triple. Um,
gotcha.
just yeah, just doing it more when your fermentation is warmer. Um, yeah, I mean, you can do pump overs and punch downs at the same time to just extremely
Really,
extract.
right. And jump up and down on it too if you want to.
Oh yeah, all at the same time.
Well, so I mean, I am familiar with Santa Barbara grapes and growing conditions, and I'm curious how you deal with keeping acid and freshness in the grapes despite the heat, and especially with Syrah and Mourvèdre. I know you can lose acid pretty quickly as things heat up in the end of the in the
Yeah.
fall.
So
So
that
what informs your picking decision? Do you pick for, how do you pick, and how do you keep a balance in your grapes?
Yeah, totally. So, as you know, I don't add anything to the grapes or the must when
Right.
I bring it into the cellar. So I'm really focused on acid in the vineyard before I harvest.
Me too.
And
Yep.
especially this year, we had kind of a low acid year just with all of our heat waves. So that,
Yeah, we had like an early heat spike, a middle heat spike, and a late heat spike.
oh my gosh, yes, we did. It was a hard year to farm. Um,
Yeah.
But yeah, so that often means for me that our grapes are going to be lower in alcohol, just as
Right.
the shift of acid and sugar accumulation happens. So yeah, our instead of being around 13.5% alcohol with added acid, our wines are, more like 12.5% alcohol with natural acidity.
Right.
And that's just, that changes year to year, as does nature. This
Right.
year, that's kind of what happened,
Yep.
and that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I found as well. Um, have you do you do anything like picking at multiple times, like earlier, do like a portion of a wine on the earlier side to keep that freshness and then a portion later to get
Totally.
more flavor development?
Absolutely. Yeah. So with a Syrah this year, I it was my first year making Syrah from this vineyard. So me and
Mm-hmm.
my friend Mikey Juni of Scar of the Sea, who is also making Syrah from the vineyard this year,
Mm.
we picked early as kind of like an acid pick. Um,
Yeah.
and then we picked a little bit like a week and a half later as more of a sugar pick. And we
Nice.
managed
Yeah.
to pick right before the biggest heat spike. So thank heavens. It was like we
Right.
Saturday morning or Friday morning, and I think it was 116 that Saturday and 118 that Sunday. It was
Yeah.
brutal.
Yep.
So,
I did that too.
oh,
I think
yeah,
I had a Syrah pick that Friday as well. That's funny.
nice,
Um,
nice. Yeah, so
um,
and it's cool. The I left the wines separate in the cellar just to kind of understand how the acidity and the alcohol kind of plays with that site specifically. And they're really
yeah.
cool. I mean, exactly as expected. The first pick is like leaner and tighter and crisper, but still has plenty of depth and color and texture. It's amazing. And then
Right.
the second pick is a little bit weightier and lush. And they're
Right.
going to be amazing together.
Yeah.
They're going to go into the same bottle, but it's cool to
You
watch them.
don't know yet.
No, they will. They will.
They
Yeah.
will. Yeah. Yeah. No, I had that too. I mean, we did that with two, our Syrah and Pinot, two separate picks, and that exactly as you described. And it
Cool.
is that like, hopefully the combination. I mean, you never know when you blend, but hopefully that combination will be sort of the best of both worlds, where you end up with balance as well as complexity and everything else, the lushness, but the textural and fresh component of the acid. Yeah, very exciting. I felt like I discovered something, but I'm sure it's not new. But it seems like we should all know about this. If you have the ability to pick multiple times
Right.
and
Well,
you're
that's
trying to make
beauty.
natural wine, it really is the only way to get that sort of balance while maintaining acidity without adding anything, you know?
Yeah, I mean
I
that's
don't
the beauty of another beauty of farming your own spot. It's kind of hard to ask a vineyard management company that, farms 500 acres, "Oh, can I get 1 ton this day and then in 5 days can I get my other ton?" They're going to be like, "Oh my gosh, worst client ever."
right. Yeah, we don't talk to us until you're ordering 10 tons or something, you know?
But it's okay. Yeah, I think it's important. You got to play with it and yeah, it's nature.
Yeah.
It changes.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, I just am looking to the future of like, assuming we're going to have more difficult vintages in terms of heat, especially here, below, once you get below the Bay Area, but even the Bay Area is starting to have some issues with heat. We've got to figure out how to make good wines, naturally without, relying on the crutches of additives if we want to do natural wines. And I think these kind of techniques and things are important to sort of, get out there and figure out. It's fun stuff. I like the problem solving that goes into
Yeah.
it.
And there's this big deep rooted thing in California. Like you don't get ripe flavors unless you have 23 bricks, 24 bricks, 25 bricks. And I've just simply found that that's not the case. And we're all approving that wrong. And I think the trend
Yeah.
will change if it hasn't already.
I'm surprised you stopped at 25. I think 30 is actually where a lot of people are picking
Totally
in
right.
some places.
You're
Uh,
totally right. Yeah. And it's mind blowing.
I mean, when I was first starting out, I was always like, oh, yeah, like the longer it hangs, the more flavor you get. And I would like pick, as late as possible, and often ended up with sweet wines because you just can't ferment at a certain point if you don't water back. But
Totally.
um, yeah,
It ends up being more work if you if you harvest later. You have to do more calculations.
that's right. I know it's true. Yeah, like the hardest work is really picking at the right time. And then the grapes do sort of take care of themselves if you
It
allow them
certainly
to.
feels like that.
Well, leasing a vineyard is an interesting option. And had you considered it before this? Like, was this something that was on your radar? What brought this to as a opportunity or a thought for you? And can you
Sure.
talk about some of the pros and cons of that?
Yeah, well, leasing, you in essence have full control. That's obviously like leaseor specific, but you have to work with the owners. But for me, that was the most available option, considering I don't have a lot of capital to be buying my own land or buying a established vineyard, etc.
Right. That's
So
that very inexpensive prime vineyard real estate in Santa Barbara, I'm sure.
I know. And this is probably even one of the more affordable regions. Well, not for much longer, but
Right. You're in
uh,
Los Olivos district, right? Or
yeah,
Los Olivos. It's pronounced Los Olivos, right?
it's pronounced Los Olivos. Yeah.
I always do that wrong. And so what is the range of that district? You're
So,
around the town of Los Olivos, I imagine.
yeah, it's right around the town of Los Olivos and it goes all the way to Ballard Canyon.
Okay.
So it's encompassed in Santa Ynez, like the greater Santa Ynez.
Hmm.
And so the far western side is Ballard Canyon, and that's its own AVA. And then,
Does it
it's
touch
kind of
Foxen on the east?
Um, I don't know off the top of my head, to be
Okay.
honest, but that sounds about right. But I want to say Foxen is now Alisos. I am not sure.
I think there are two now. Elisos is there's
It's more
Elisos
north.
and Foxen.
Yeah, yeah,
Pretty
yeah.
sure.
So it's all around the town of Los Olivos.
Yeah, got it. Good enough. Great. Well, what does the future hold then? What are you making? You said you're making. What are you said you're making Graciano, and
Yeah, rosé of
is that right?
yeah, rosé.
Rosé of Graciano. That sounds fun. Yeah, because it's a pretty earthy grape, right? So I imagine the rosé sort of livens it up.
But it really retains its acidity. So the rosé is actually
Yeah.
delicious,
Oh,
harvested
nice.
around 20 and a half, and it's been in stainless steel its whole life, and it'll stay in stainless steel barrels for aging, and it's just super tasty and fresh and bright, and yeah, really looking forward to that wine too. So that, and then the co-ferment, and then there's the Marsanne from the vines planted in 73, and then there's the Syrah from the vines planted in 71, and then I have Gamay from two other vineyards,
Nice.
and
So,
yeah,
oh, sorry,
potentially
go ahead.
Mission,
Say that again. Sorry.
potentially Mission from Lodi.
Oh, fun. So you're
Yeah,
getting into the mission scene, huh?
a little taste of my homeland, centralized.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, there's some oh man. I mean, Mission is having a comeback. It's amazing. We've
It's
got
a really cool grape. I mean,
it's like who knew that there were so many Mission vineyards in California until the past 2 years? Like all of a sudden it's like there I've everybody's making a Mission. It's amazing.
yeah,
Um you your Marsan, I'm guessing did you work with that in France?
yeah, absolutely.
And how did they make it there? Did they put it in new oak?
It just depends. We didn't
Okay.
where I worked. All of our whites were in neutral oak. Everything.
Okay.
Um,
And I'm guessing you're using oak as well
yeah,
for some of your wines?
I use all neutral oak at this point, so I'm just buying
Okay.
the barrels as I need them and I keep them.
Yep.
So
You buy them used.
I buy them used. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily ruling out new oak in the future, but right now it feels fine to not have it. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's great to kind of learn. I mean, it makes sense to me to when you're, especially learning a vineyard and the way that it's going to express itself, you kind of want to not, put a stamp on it that
yeah,
would conceal some of that expression
yeah, and in
until you figure out whether
small
it needs it or not.
quantities, if you were
You're,
to
yeah.
introduce a new oak barrel, it would just completely overwhelm the blend. It would be
Right.
50% or 30% instead of something like 10%, which would maybe be something that I wanted a little bit more.
Right, right. Until you're making a big enough quantity where like it's 1 barrel out of 10 or something.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
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 No,
The Marsan, it's fermented and aged in neutral oak, and then it spends the second half of its life in stainless.
and are you doing otherwise a pretty traditional, whole cluster press and settle it out and rack it off sediment for fermentation in barrel? Or do
Yeah.
you? Yep.
I crush my Marsan a little bit just to. I don't have a crusher, but foot tread it just to mimic
Uh-huh.
crusher, and then put
Yep.
it in the press. So there's a little bit of skin contact before it goes into the press, and then it's pressed and into a tank, and then I rack off the heavy solids. I take a little bit of the finer stuff and
Uh-huh.
it goes into a barrel, and then I don't do
Nice.
anything, and it just does what it does.
Right. So it goes fully through malolactic and just becomes
Last year it
stable.
didn't. This year, we'll see. I mean, it doesn't always. There's no rule.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's
because
whatever
I
happens,
don't
right?
fine or filter either, it has to have a good enough pH to not go through ml to be safe in the bottle with minimal sulfur. So
So
it's
this
just,
is
a gamble. I mean, not a gamble.
that's
It's just dependent year to year.
that's my question for you. So you're not filtering even if it doesn't fully go through mallow.
As long as your pHs are good,
Okay.
you
What is good
can
to
do that.
feel safe that you have a partial mallow wine in bottle?
Well, there's a lot that goes into that. So,
Right.
I mean, if you have if you have high VA and a low pH, that's not great for a healthy wine with malic acid still in it. So, but
Right.
if you don't have, if you have a pretty healthy wine with low bacteria counts and low VAs and pretty low malics, then you can feel pretty safe about, doing a 50-part total sulfur add and it staying pretty safe in bottle. Also, yeah, I mean, it's not like a black and white answer, and
Of
I don't
course. Yeah.
necessarily like. It's super dependent. I mean, it's a living thing, your wine,
Right.
if it's unfined and unfiltered. So, yeah,
So
it's
there's some risk probably
it's
at
a low
any point.
risk, but
Yeah.
ultimately, like it's unstripped and it's in its purest form. It's just settled and racked off the lees, and that's that. It's wine in its purest form.
Would you filter if you were concerned about the stability of it in bottle?
Um,
Or would you do something else with it to avoid filtering?
I don't know. I don't know. Like
I and
I
I'm not
guess
trying to put you on the spot. This is like a dilemma I've faced is like, do I filter or do I put like 70 ppm sulfur in it? And I don't know which one I feel
I would say if
less.
your wine is hazy, and if you have a hazy red wine, yeah, your wine is probably microbial, and maybe
Right.
filtering would be a better option. But sometimes like those, if you send away your analysis and you have really high microbial yeast counts, and you ask, ETS, what do you recommend? They're going to be like, ooh, this is not safe. Definitely filter this, or, all of that kind of stuff. But really, it's a gamble. So it's a personal question. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
for instance, I've had wines where I've sent away and they've said that exact same thing. Like, this wine is not healthy. Like, you risk a massive bloom later on. And then,
Right.
I didn't do anything to it. I bottled it unfined, unfiltered, and with the same amount of sulfur that I would normally. And 3 years later, the wine is just fine. Tastes
Yep.
great. So it's all, it
But I
just
imagine
depends
it could go
sometimes.
the other way. You are rolling the dice a little bit.
Totally. Totally. Yeah.
Right. I
living.
mean, and yeah, of course, yeah. And but you're comfortable with that. That's what you're saying. Like that's the
Yeah,
personal
well,
choice. Like,
yeah, I'm relying on tasting wine for the last 10 years and understanding like what I'm smelling before it goes into bottle. Are these really bad things that I really don't want, or is this just, are these microbes kind of living with each other in this wine, and they're not going to reproduce into a crazy amount because I don't have any sugar left in the wine. I don't have any malic acid left in the wine. What else are they going to eat? So
right.
it's just, yeah, it's a feeling.
I love it. Well, I mean, I think that is a reality that you have to pay attention, and just like in the vineyard, you're working with living things. You're working with a something with soul. You have to improvise and really read it. Like, that's why I think there is a level of expertise that comes with just like years of observation
Oh,
and paying
totally.
attention and doing that. And I think you I love that you are approaching that way. I think that's a really uh, organic way to approach it,
Well,
pun
thank
intended,
you. I
or
mean, yeah,
whatever.
I feel like the natural wine scene, in the past, it's had kind of a bad reputation of, being like super gnarly wines, for lack of a better word, or mousy, or mega VA, or that kind of thing. But it really doesn't have to be that. And
Yeah,
I'm grateful for my kind of classic winemaking background to have all of the knowledge and, understand the pathways of all of these microbes and the way wine works fundamentally, to be able to apply that to making natural wine. Taste
right,
like that also tastes very classic. You're not going to get any bad flavors or crazy aromas or super VA or a bunch of bread or anything like that. It's still going to be very pure, but also like, you know, a good representation of where it's from.
so let me ask you one other question, one final question, I'll say. Well,
Okay.
second to last question.
Okay.
um, why are you buying grapes if you are putting all this energy and cost into the vineyard that you're leasing and farming?
Yeah. Um,
And it's got multiple grapes growing on it, right? So you
Totally. Yeah. So I have five varieties.
you got plenty of variety going on, but you still are reaching out and purchasing other things.
Yeah.
Is that just a because you love Gamay or
Yes.
what?
That's that's the big answer to that. Yeah. So I kind of my intention in starting a wine brand was, at least at first, was to have an homage to my time in the Northern Rhone. And
Uh-huh.
it was a big part of my life there. We were right below Beaujolais, and that's what we drank. That was the cheapest wine, and we drank a ton of it. And that's the wine
Nice.
of Lyon, the city that we hung out the most in, me and friends and colleagues. Yeah, and so there's no Gamay at our vineyard in Los Olivos. In my opinion, it's probably a little bit too hot to plant any Gamay there or graft any Gamay there.
Right.
So yeah, we just get to, it's fun to work with other sites too. And
True. Yeah.
yeah, so that's,
Yeah, if you
and my partner Topher, that was his first love of, that was his first wine love too, was Beaujolais. So it's a little
nice.
nod to that also. As many first, like, it's many people's favorite wine. It's easy pleaser.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's true, especially with the Gamay Nouveau. It's sort of that tradition of straight off the press kind of right around Thanksgiving here. I think a lot of people have been exposed to it that way, but more so lately. I mean, since the 2009 vintage, I think Beaujolais has sort of had a boom. It seems like. Um,
Totally.
I mean
Yeah,
that.
it's getting expensive now.
Yeah, it is. Definitely is. Well, so how can people learn more about what you're doing, about your vineyard and your winery, and get some of your wine, and you know, get in touch if you want people to get in touch with you or see what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm so open. So if anyone has any questions about farming regeneratively here in Santa Barbara County, or leasing a vineyard, or making natural wine, just send me an email. You can find it all on my website. You can read about the vineyard a little bit more and read about the wines a little bit more. Um, yeah, it's amevivewine.com.
And that's Amevive, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Wine.com. Yeah, and
And
there's the website is always evolving, as is most things in my
oh yes,
life. So yeah, I intend to like start a journal, a farming journal, and
nice.
adding.
It's a great website. I do like your website. It's clean and simple and beautiful.
Thanks.
And you are very open. I mean, I have to say, having met you just briefly, I mean, more not briefly, but recently, you're already one of my favorite people,
Oh,
both just for your openness and generosity of spirit, but also for all the values that you have that you're putting into your wine and your farming. It's really, I can't, can't wait to taste what you're doing.
thanks. Yeah, I'm looking forward to share it with you and taste your stuff.
Hey, yeah. Well, I'm excited to taste my stuff too. The new stuff again. Like I'm always excited for the new year.
I know
Which,
there's some you have to stay optimistic in this business.
right?
It'll-
It's like I want to taste what it tastes like now, but I'm also impatient to taste what it tastes like in 2 years and 4 years. And I'm the worst. I have the worst personality for being a winemaker. No patience at all.
and don't forget to save. You can't sell all your wine. You have to save some cases to taste in those 4 years.
Oh, I hope I have that problem of having to hold some back sometime soon.
You will.
Alice, thank you so much. This has been wonderful, super informative, and you have such a great story. I really appreciate you talking to us about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.